Dearest Mother, just a few lines to let you hear from me. I am doing fine. I am supposed to come home April 1st.
He was only 15 years old, and he was only weeks away from parole from the Industrial Boys School.
These boys were not criminals. They were children of God, and they should have been treated as such.
Say, Mother, will you try to come down here Sunday? Will you send me a box next week for sure? If you can't send the box, send me 3 packages of cigarettes.
Willie Piggee was dreaming of visits, a care package, of small comforts that meant the world in a place like the Wrightsville Boys Industrial School.
It is small comfort to anyone that these young victims were locked in for their own good. For what good is security without humanity?
My dearest Mother, the one I love most of all, from your son, William Piggee.
Who speaks for the dead at Wrightsville? Who locked the doors? Who will be held to answer?
Welcome back to part 3 of the Coroner's Report podcast, Locked Doors, Lost Boys. I'm Tracey Carrington. In this episode, we continue our look at one of Arkansas's darkest nights, the fire at the Wrightsville Boys Industrial School, where 21 black teenagers lost their lives inside a locked dormitory.
I'm Steve Nawojczyk. I worked in Arkansas as a coroner and served as the director of the state crime lab. You know, death has a way of leaving questions in its wake, and sometimes the official record doesn't tell the whole story. I've learned in retirement the shadows don't fade, they linger.
And that's what we try to do, to dig up those bits of lost evidence, lost stories, and put you, the listener, right there. At times in this episode, you'll hear AI-generated voices reading from historical accounts. These aren't original recordings, but recreations meant to bring the words of the past back to life. Now, the first task after the fire was untangling the events that silenced those 21 children.
Survivor Roy Davis was quoted in the paper after the fire, but he was also interviewed decades later by the Arkansas Times.
The fire started in the chapel. If you could call it a chapel, it was in the front, and that's where it was right there. I ain't going to say how it started or whatever.
Bill Struebing, the deputy state fire marshal, was called.
We are studying possible causes for the fire. We looked through the ruins yesterday in search of more clues. An electrical short indicated some survivors reported that the lights were blinking earlier in the evening. The dormitory was heated with a makeshift wood stove constructed from an oil drum. The third possibility is a spontaneous combustion. There was a quantity of paint that had been stored in the sewing room area, and possible lightning, rags, or other painting paraphernalia caused the fire.
Reporters pressed for answers. Captain William Seaton of the Little Rock Fire Department said the blaze appeared to have started near the center of the U-shaped dormitory. Investigators also confirmed there were no working fire extinguishers inside, and the only available water source was in the swimming pool.
There were no working fire extinguishers, no alarm system, no second exit, just one locked door, and mesh wire nailed over the windows. Warnings had been ignored, and 21 children were dead.
In the book, Black Boys Burning, historian Griff Stockley recorded an interview with James Watson, who was 18 at the time of the fire. Watson said the school's wiring often sparked and failed. Once he and another boy climbed up into the ceiling and saw what looked like the original 1936 knob and tube system, bare wires running across the rafters with no insulation at all.
You know, that could come from mice chewing on the wires to sharpen their teeth, and they're kind of fond of the cloth and rubber insulation.
It literally was out in the middle of a field, and there were other reports that mentioned mice infesting the food supplies.
The reports of flickering lights sounded like the marks of an electrical short, but as accusations spread, Buddy Gaines' story was no longer the same. It was evolving.
No adult was in the building, but one door to the dormitory was not locked.
The local press noticed.
At the time of the fire, Wilson Hall, the farm manager, was in the kitchen in another building about a block away from the dormitory, and Lee Austin was at his residence about 150 yards away. There were 3 sets of keys to the locks. I had one set. Wilson Hall had a set, and so did Lee Austin, the storekeeper.
The newspapers were quick to point out this statement was a bit different from the story Gaines relayed to the press the morning of the fire. Buddy had been adamant that Wilson Hall was inside the building when the fire started.
If an adult with a key had been in the building when the fire started, this story would have been drastically different. I understand some of the discrepancies came from the confusion in those first few hours, and no one had ever expected to lose a boy in a fire, and certainly not 21 of them in a single night.
The fire marshal continued to investigate.
I spent several hours in the ashes of the burned building trying to determine how the fire started, but I am still undecided. However, I believe the location where the fire started is fixed to the attic of the caretaker's office. There was an addition added to the U-shaped building sitting between the two wings. The fire spread out from that point in both directions.
One of our fire experts, Keith Hulse, agrees it's possible, but proving exactly where it started would have been nearly impossible at the time. Most of the building and the evidence inside was already destroyed.
Best you can say, yeah, it started in the caretaker's room. I don't see how they could say it started in the attic. It could have very well been electrical.
Our other expert, Jim Hawley, echoed nearly the same words Bill Struebing used decades ago.
You know, like your attic. So you have a ceiling and then you see the pointy top of the building that runs a long ways there. They call that the cock loft. When the fire starts and the heat rises through the ceiling, it starts to spread left and right. It follows oxygen, it follows air, and it's kind of a condensed area, and that thing will burn and burn and burn and get hotter and hotter and hotter, and then finally burn through and come back down again. The ceiling will start falling on people. So it provides the superheated gases a place to expand. Nowadays, building codes are a little bit different, especially in apartments and things where the cock lofts are cemented off. So if there's a fire in one place in an apartment, it can't ravage down all the way through to the other end as freely as probably what happened in that building there. That thing had been burning for a good while before it was detected.
The boys remembered that the lights were on when they first saw the flames, even though they'd flickered on and off earlier in the night during that storm.
I talked with some of the boys who escaped the fire and learned that their electric lights were still on during the fire. But since there were 6 electric circuits in the building, this didn't preclude a short circuit as the possible source of the blaze because some other circuit may have caused it.
Struebing couldn't rule out lightning as a cause, and he also hadn't ruled out the makeshift wood-burning stoves, which were essentially just old oil drums turned on their side.
Survivor Roy Davis told the Arkansas Times in 2008 that the chapel and classroom were heated by a makeshift stove. It was just an oil drum turned on its side with legs and with the logs stacked nearby.
That doesn't sound safe.
Nope. Not at all.
Governor Faubus ordered 3 separate investigations, one from the school board, the state police, and a third from the deputy state fire marshal. He also pushed for a grand jury indictment. Each report revealed a little more about the fire.
The reports will be available next week, and that's when we will decide if criminal charges will be filed against anyone. The report would also be the basis for deciding whether any employees of the school would be dismissed. There were 12 employees, including 6 men at the school, in addition to Superintendent Gaines.
Marlon Weems says you could see early on how Faubus was looking for an out.
After the fire happened and there was an investigation, they kind of lay it at the feet of the black folks that were running the place.
Buddy Gaines did himself no favors when speaking to the press, but in the middle of crisis, sometimes solid facts are hard to pin down.
Wilson Hall and the others were in a nearby shop building when the fire started.
Wait, I thought he was in the kitchen.
Or in the caretaker's office.
Or at home.
There sure were a lot of people awake and roaming around at 3:15 in the morning.
Remember, this was just 19 months after the Central High crisis, during the 1958-1959 school year, known as the lost year because no kids were going to school. Governor Orval Faubus had shut down the Little Rock public schools rather than comply with federal desegregation orders. At a press conference, a reporter even asked him if he thought the Wrightsville fire might have been connected to the integration turmoil.
I think this can be ruled completely out of consideration. I can't conceive of any connection between the fire and the racial situation with the Central High matter. Of course, with the type of boys you have at an institution like that, it's not unusual for inmates to set fires to escape. Whether this was done, I don't know.
Wait, what? Did he just throw shade on the victims?
Oh, yeah, he did, and the public sure took note.
We don't understand such a heartless comment as boys of this type. Can't a high state official have any more Christian regard for the relatives of these pathetic victims? What are we white people doing to provide a decent and satisfactory environment and entertainment for these boys?
There was plenty of blame to go around, but Orval Faubus seemed more than willing to blame the boys themselves than to admit any failure on the state's part.
A bill to appropriate $150,000 to the school to replace the building that burned and to repair and make other buildings fire-resistant would be introduced in the Senate. Under that bill, the state would give money to the school to immediately rebuild, and the school would later pay the funds back with proceeds from the sale of several hundreds of acres of land the school owns. That land could bring as much as $300,000. The state will also pay for a mass funeral with funds from my governor's emergency fund.
While the funeral arrangements were being made, the investigation pressed on, and the governor seemed determined to pin the blame squarely on Superintendent Buddy Gaines.
As folks say, he told it a little differently every time the tale got told.
Gaines often came across as evasive. His career was on the line, and he likely had his own family to think about. When asked directly whether he'd ever assigned an adult to stay with the boys overnight, he answered bluntly, he didn't think it was necessary.
He didn't think it was necessary? 21 kids were burned alive, and the man in charge said it wasn't necessary to put an adult in the room with them? That is so much bullshit.
Sure is, but no one wanted to place blame on Buddy Gaines. He was a good man, well-educated. No one expected this. In the days that followed, the outrage grew. Ministers, teachers, and parents filled the airwaves and the newspapers with their anger, pointing their fingers squarely more at Governor Orval Faubus than anywhere near Buddy Gaines.
Instead of owning any part of the tragedy, Faubus was quick to stir the pot and point folks in another direction. Suddenly, people weren't talking about the fire codes or locked doors, they were talking about payroll. At his order, an audit was launched. It revealed irregularities. Superintendent Gaines's wife, Mary, was drawing a salary, and a clerk, B.T. Pumphrey, was listed as a full-time employee, though staff swore they had never once seen him at the school.
The governor seized on those irregularities.
It was a way to deflect, to make the story about crooked staff instead of crooked policy.
Spin, spin, spin.
Like Politics 101.
Mary Gaines defended herself, saying the board had created the position when Buddy Gaines was hired to help supplement his low pay, and she was working with the boys at the school part-time.
In fact, there's an article in the paper where Faubus is talking about hiring Mr. and Mrs. Gaines, so he knew she was on staff. Think he forgot?
Nope. Truth from Orval Faubus only showed up when it saved his own skin.
Ha! Buddy Gaines denied the governor's accusations, too.
I did not force employees to lie to investigators. And every hiring decision, including my wife's, was made with the full knowledge of the board.
Gaines wasn't going quietly. He said he hadn't lied. He said the board knew everything.
The employees themselves issued a public statement.
That was a bold move.
We accused the governor of character assassination. He had seen the deplorable conditions at this school before the fire. His remarks have done irreparable harm to our integrity.
They turned the blame back on Faubus. If he had seen the school before and seen the deficiencies they asked, why didn't he fix it?
One employee who refused to give a name went further, saying it would be impossible for any court to hold the staff liable for an act of God.
They called it an act of God, not a locked door, not wire nailed to windows, not neglect, an act of God.
It's morning. Again. You've hit that snooze alarm 3 times, your cat is sitting there judging you, and your normal coffee tastes like sadness. Enter BadRabbitCoffee.com, roasted right here in Western Pennsylvania in small craft batches because life's too short for mediocre caffeine. And BadRabbitCoffee.com will ship it straight to your door. Yes, worldwide. So even if you're hiding from adulthood in another time zone, you can still start your day like a civilized human. Tastes like motivation. Get your monthly coffee fix at BadRabbitCoffee.com. Bad Rabbit because mornings are hard enough. The press quickly split. Some papers rallied behind the governor.
Governor Faubus is right to demand the dismissal of Superintendent Gaines. The payroll irregularities and the negligence exposed after this fire justify his action.
Focusing on the payroll discrepancies meant avoiding the real story.
Behind every headline was a simple truth. A dormitory meant to reform children had become their prison. Private funerals were held for some of the boys, but 14 were buried together 3 days after the fire. 14 caskets were lined up in a row with no certainty about which boy was in which casket.
Years later, Elmer Horner, father of Willie Horner, one of the victims, was interviewed about that night.
I remember seeing bodies lined up along the wall at the funeral home.
Willie Horner was just 17 and had been at the school for only 6 months. He and his friend, 15-year-old John George, had stolen a car from a North Little Rock car lot to go joyriding. They stopped for gas when the police arrived and arrested them. They both died in the fire.
They were charged with burglary and grand larceny and were on their way to the state penitentiary when the judge decided they were too young to do hard time. Instead, they were sent to the boys' school and inadvertently sentenced to death. Decades later, his father was briefly interviewed by the Arkansas Times.
I remember the smell.
I'll tell you something, the smell of burning flesh is absolutely the most horrible thing that you can pull in. And the fire, if the boys were unlucky enough not to die of carbon monoxide poisoning to start with, they died a horrible fire death. And you know, when a body burns in an intense fire, it sort of reduces itself to a fetal position, mostly because the muscles and the skin and all of that, of course, is burning and contracting. And it's horrible to see and it's horrible to smell. It's just a horrible way to die. I just can't imagine those boys in that trapped area just dying. The Pulaski County Coroner filled out the stack of death certificates.
There was no way of knowing whether some of the boys burned or suffocated to death, but all were burned beyond recognition, so I used third-degree burns as the cause of death on the death certificates.
More than 300 people crowded Haven of Rest Cemetery to honor the 14 boys buried side by side. 7 others were laid to rest privately by their families. Several mothers collapsed in grief as Reverend Roland Smith spoke.
These boys were not criminals. They were children of God, and they should have been treated as such.
They shouldn't have been treated as such. Not locked up, not left alone with fire and smoke, and certainly not with the damn screens nailed over the windows.
While Orval Faubus squawked on and on about an investigation, he also was making plans.
I'm introducing a bill to provide for the sale of the land and appropriation of the revenues to fund the building of a new dormitory at the Negro Boys Industrial School. The school has some 2,500 acres of land that could be sold. $150,000 will be used to replace the burned dormitory with a new, improved, and fireproof dormitory.
At Faubus's request, the school board began their own investigation.
Just 5 days after the fire, the board finished its inquiry, but the report wasn't released right away. It just sat on Faubus's desk for 2 weeks while he pondered how to spin the news.
Griff Stockley wrote at Black Boys Burning that the board chairman, Alfred Smith, said 23 witnesses testified. One after another, employees told the same story. Lee Austin and Wilson Hall took turns sleeping in the dorm while Mr. Banks was in the hospital.
Again and again, staff members praised Superintendent Gaines. Researcher Griff Stockley later pulled the board's report from the archives and found finger-pointing between Lee Austin and Wilson Hall. Hall testified that while Mr. Banks was out sick, Buddy Gaines had instructed him to get up every morning at 3 a.m. to check on the boys and to make sure Lee Austin had not fallen asleep while assigned to stay in the dormitory in the caretaker's office where the fire began.
Wilson Hall said he had checked the dorm every night at 9 and again at 3 a.m. He was the first adult to reach the fire, and he tried to free the boys, something several survivors confirmed. But his account still conflicted with earlier statements where he said he was in the building but left to go home for that flashlight. There was just no way that fire could have started and turned into an inferno in that short of time.
More perplexing to me is Buddy Gaines' story. He told the board that he was asleep at his home when he received the call at 3:15 a.m. The boys ran to Lee Austin's house next door, but not to Buddy Gaines' house. Instead, they phoned him.
The superintendent's house was located about a block away from the dormitory.
Gaines arrived at the dorm at 10 after 4. Other adults, including Lee Austin and Wilson Hall, were there trying to tear off the window screen.
That whole arrangement was odd. Both Lee Austin and Wilson Hall worked the farm and the livestock. Neither had an easy job. Both men worked long days of physical labor and would have been exhausted. They both needed their rest.
When questioned about hazards in the building, Gaines acknowledged problems with exposed wiring in the caretaker's room and with the flooring. He pushed back at the state, saying that he lacked the funds to have the building rewired and that money for such would have to come from the legislature.
It was like watching a tennis match with volley after volley being fired back and forth.
More like a game of hot potato.
In the end, the board concluded unanimously that the fire could not have been prevented. They recommended formal reprimands for those responsible for the safety of those boys.
Doesn't sound like that board was digging too hard for answers. More like they just scratched the surface and called it good. Next, the finding by the Arkansas State Police and the State Fire Marshal.
I have received the findings, and it's voluminous. I haven't had a chance to study it.
Old Orval sure did like to study. The state police and fire marshal reports were straightforward. They couldn't pin down a cause, but confirmed the boys were locked in and no one with a key was nearby when the fire started. Then came the board's recommendations.
Cover for the governor.
Exactly.
I am recommending to the board of the Negro Boys Industrial School dismiss Superintendent Buddy Gaines, his wife Mary Gaines, B.T. Pumphrey, and Wilson Hall, Jr., the farm manager.
Then Governor Faubus laid out his case on the table.
The investigation showed that Gaines got employees together after the fire and coached them with a story to tell the investigators. The story included Wilson Hall and Lee Austin locking the boys in each night, with one of the men staying in the dormitory and the other making checks through the night. On the night of the fire, the guard left the building to get a flashlight. The fire was supposed to have broken out after the guard was out in a building about 100 yards away. I may add that nothing in the evidence supported this version.
Here's where the story makes a left-hand turn.
Hall and Austin later contacted a colored friend of mine in Little Rock and had him tell me they wanted to see me. They met me at the governor's mansion and told a version of the story Gaines had told them to tell. They told me that ever since the employees had been in the hospital, they locked the boys up about 7 or 8 at night and then went home. They told me they wanted to correct the story that they had been forced to tell the board. They admitted this story was made up by Mr. Buddy Gaines.
Then there were the findings from the payroll investigation.
I also had the investigation broadened to look at payroll, and we found that Mrs. Mary Gaines was still listed on the payroll. A year ago, I found that Mrs. Gaines, who is the superintendent's wife, was on the payroll of the industrial school, although she is a full-time teacher at Dunbar. He sat right there in this office and promised to take her off the payroll, but a check showed that she was still listed.
2 for the price of 1. You can almost overlook Orval Faubus being Orval, spinning and weaving excuses, but even the board president was quoted in the paper saying he knew all along that Mary Gaines was on the payroll. Beyond that, he added, I have no comment.
A little CYA from the board president right there. The next finding was a little harder to understand.
The investigation also showed an employee listed as B.T. Pumphrey as receiving a paycheck. Members of the board whom I talked to knew nothing about him, and no other employees mentioned Pumphrey during the investigation, nor mentioned ever seeing him around the school. Mr. Gaines told me that Mr. Pumphrey was the TV repairman, but I only know of 2 television sets at the school.
Funny thing about that TV repairman, B.T. Pumphrey. See, Superintendent Gaines' wife, Mary, had been a Pumphrey before she married, and she happened to have a brother named Booker Thomas Pumphrey, B.T. Pumphrey. The newspaper reporters never seemed to catch the family connection between Booker T. Pumphrey and Mary Gaines. In print, he was first listed as a TV repairman. Later, he appeared as a payroll clerk. So we went back and we checked those census records.
Wouldn't you know it, Booker T. Pumphrey was well educated. Like his sister and brother-in-law, he had lived in Chicago for quite some time. In 1940, he worked in a print shop. In 1950, He was listed as a porter riding the out-of-state trains.
Booker T could have easily been traveling in and out of the state by train. Superintendent Gaines openly acknowledged his identity to the board. What's a little harder to explain is that later, Gaines was quoted as saying Booker was neither a bookkeeper or a television repairman.
My brother-in-law, Mr. Pumphrey, had been employed at the school, and on visits to Little Rock, he would do radio and television repair, electrical work, and plumbing.
I could use a plumber, electrician, TV repairman, and bookkeeper.
So could I. The board president insisted there was nothing improper about Pumphrey's employment, though he also admitted the board didn't know he'd been hired at all.
It sounded like the board really trusted Buddy Gaines to run the school.
I agree. None of the board or the politicians wanted to be really hands-on at that school.
Buddy Gaines denied all of the accusations.
I don't care what Gaines or the staff says, I'm going to straighten school out. They let 21 boys burn up, and it could have been prevented.
He was a real something for sure. The school employees were not having it.
Did Mr. Faubus recommend then that finances be appropriated to correct any of these deplorable conditions? Why has he not published the actual cause of the fire instead of engaging in the character assassination of the superintendent and staff?
The outrage by the staff didn't stop at the state line.
Outrage poured into the newspaper offices, church pulpits, and the governor's own mailbox.
Editorial pages filled with accusations that the fire wasn't an accident at all. It was the inevitable result of segregation and neglect. People saw clearly what the state wanted to avoid, that this fire was not just about flames and smoke.
Dale Woodcock was an early prison reformer and had written a book about the antiquated Arkansas prison system. He had warned of the neglect at that boys' school. He wrote a scathing letter.
Perhaps the tragic fire at the Negro Boys Industrial School will bring about a change, or it may be forgotten within a few days, and the prison officials can continue with their sadistic practices.
Some of the letters were sent directly to the governor's office and remained unpublished for years.
Many were afraid to sign their letters in Jim Crow, Arkansas.
I feel there is inequality in the schools of the state, particularly in Little Rock, where the trouble started. I feel that the state elected officials are the guilty ones in all cases, and that they be assessed as the guilty ones.
Some came from cities far away. This one was written by the Greater King Solomon Baptist Church in Detroit.
We hold you in the Jim Crow system of the South just as responsible for the burning of the Negro children in Little Rock as if you had struck the match. We pledge to fight until you and the subhuman racialism you represent are thrown into the garbage dump of history.
The editor of the Oklahoma City Advertiser squarely placed the blame on the state.
Certainly it is one thing not to want to go to school with Negro children, not to want to mingle with them, but something else again to burn them alive. Not even Governor Faubus has undertaken to justify what happened.
Faubus had few supporters, but at least one wrote an editorial.
There can be no question that Governor Faubus is right in recommending that Buddy Gaines be discharged from the superintendent's position at the Negro Boys Industrial School.
Was it signed by Orval E. Smith?
Makes you wonder, doesn't it?
I wouldn't put it past him. Some of those letters were strikingly blunt.
Southern states pack an unroadworthy bus full of Negro children in cattle-like fashion and snuff out their lives by drowning. Arkansas pens them up animal-like in cages and leaves them to burn to death.
Some of the harshest criticism of the governor came from the Arkansas State Press, the largest black-owned newspaper in Little Rock.
It was owned by L.C. and Daisy Bates. If you recall, Daisy Bates was instrumental in the desegregation of the Little Rock School District. The paper had been pounding the governor for years. L.C. Bates didn't hold his tongue on this event either.
Governor Faubus is attempting to cover up the state's discrimination by laying the blame entirely upon the shoulders of the school's personnel. The fire and deaths of the boys could have not been caused by the employees, since the governor admits that there was no indication of arson.
Faubus went down that gopher hole and was still digging.
Yeah, and L.C. Bates wasn't about to let him slither away.
Those of us who know the governor's tactics cannot take too seriously any statement that the governor makes. His blame on the personnel of the school for the tragic happenings could easily be one of the holes that the governor boasts about to make his escape when trapping appears evident. It is our opinion that the love for those boys at the school was more responsible for Gaines being at the school than the plowboy salary that the state of Arkansas paid him.
Eager to turn public attention away from what the state should have or could have done, Faubus began making plans for a new building. But first, he moved to sell off a piece of prime real estate.
This concludes part 3 of Locked Doors, Lost Boys on the Coroner's Report podcast. If you like what you've heard, please like, follow, and share. You can find us at coronersreport.net or on any social media platform at the Coroner's Report podcast. Thanks goes out to our voice actors J.D. West, Alan Prather, and Savvy Valentine. Special thanks to Keith Hulse, Judge Steve Teskey, Marlon Weems, Dr. Brian Mitchell, Jim Hawley, and Guy Lancaster. This episode would not have been possible without the decades of research conducted by Griff Stockley for his book Black Boys Burning, the 1959 fire at the Arkansas Negro Boys Industrial School, published by the University Press of Mississippi. We also acknowledge the companion volume Blood in Their Eyes, the Elaine Massacre of 1919 by Griff Stockley, Dr. Brian Mitchell, and Guy Lancaster, published by the University of Arkansas Press. For additional context on race and history of the state, we recommend Race and Ethnicity in Arkansas, also from the University of Arkansas Press. We also want to thank Encyclopedia Arkansas, the Journeyman newsletter on Substack, the Butler Center for Arkansas Studies, the Bobby Roberts Library of Arkansas History and Art, the Central Arkansas Library System, and the University of Arkansas Little Rock Center for Arkansas History and Culture. With any research project, we'd be lost without the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and AY Magazine. Copyright 2025 Aussie Grove Media Group, LLC.